Hello and welcome back to the Eat Like Ruby podcast. I am back with a solo episode today, which I am super excited for. So I'm going to speak all about my own personal nutrition and training goals for 2023. I have spoken in the last few episodes about some overall do's and don'ts with nutrition and training coming into the new year. So definitely go back and check out those episodes if you haven't listened to those. But today I'm going to speak more to my own personal goals and more so how I'm going to achieve them and why I want to achieve them in the first place. So if you follow me on Instagram, you would have seen a little bit about this already, but I think it's really cool to use the podcast to go into a bit more detail, like I said, about how I'm going to do it and why I want to do this in the first place. So if you have been following me for a while, you would have seen that I spent the last few years going through intentional muscle gaining and then fat loss phases, which is obviously something that a lot of people do in the industry. It's something that I do with a lot of my girls in Eat Like Ruby. Obviously, it's something that I am a big fan of. I've done it myself and a lot of my clients do it. But this year, I am intentionally not going to be doing that. And I'm actually super excited to be mixing it up because, like I said, I've spent the last 3 years doing that, which is really cool. I'm stoked that I did it. I am at a point right now where I am pretty stoked with my physique, as vain as that could sound, but honestly I am. I feel like I don't have the drive to go through that whole process of muscle gain and weight gain and then come out the other side into a fat loss phase and just really commit to that whole process. And I more so don't have the desire for the outcome. I think when you're going to do something like that, you have to really want it because it is quite a process. It's quite a big commitment and it's awesome. Like, I watch people kill it. I've killed it myself doing it. I think the whole thing is just really awesome, but you've got to genuinely want it to commit to something like that. And I just feel like I'm actually quite happy to hold steady where I am with my physique and not push any major changes body comp wise. And then there are just other things that I feel like are more important to me to focus on outside of body composition. So I think it can be really common if people are beginners or new to the industry or new to the world of nutrition and training, or even if you've been in it for a long time but you feel like you just haven't found your groove, it's always been quite a battle, quite a struggle for you. I think it's really common for people to just get in that mindset of I'm being good because I'm on a diet or I'm off a diet, so I'm not being good. And we've spoken about this in the last few episodes, so definitely go back and have a listen to those if you feel like you can relate to that. But I feel like people just really settle into that mindset of like, we always have to be on a diet if we want to be good. And people very often will associate being on a diet with working towards fat loss or being lighter or losing weight. And even when people are more experienced and they've sort of worked through that and they're quite into their nutrition and training, I feel like it can be really common to still get caught up in that mindset of like, we have to be in a phase. We have to be in, people talk about the whole like bulking or shredding and cutting in the bodybuilding world, but even taking that to any sort of gym or nutrition goal and just being like, am I in a gaining phase? Am I in a fat loss phase? Am I in a deficit? Like, there always has to be a phase and a goal. And I just feel like I want to focus on things outside of that. So that is exactly what I'm going to do. And if you've been following on Instagram, you would have seen that I've posted a little bit about this and we've decided to call it the Performance Project because I really want to focus on my performance this year. And there's a few things specifically that I want to speak to with that I want to focus on, and I'll go into a bit more detail, but it's just more so looking at my nutrition and training as a whole and focusing on those performance things that I'm going to speak to, as opposed to doing it purely for the sake of body composition. So I think that is the first sort of point to speak to in itself, is so often we just associate nutrition and training with working towards a body composition goal. And it just doesn't have to be that way. It absolutely can be. Like I said, I've done that. I help so many girls do that. But I think it's cool to just be open-minded to the fact that we can focus on our nutrition and training and make it a priority while not having to focus on our body composition or our weight or a specific fat loss or muscle gaining phase. And when we do this, when we do those intentional phases of fat loss or muscle gain, when we've done them effectively and we've done them well and we've got the education and we know how to do them, it's one of those things where, like, if at any time I wanted to come back to it, I could. If at any time one of my girls wanted to go back to a goal like that, we can. Like, when we know how to do it, there's not this big hype around it. Like I said before, when people get into that mindset of like, I have to always be good and I have to always be on a diet. When we understand how to structure nutrition and training for those specific body composition goals, we take back that control and we can just be like, yeah, cool, I do want to focus on that now, or no, I don't. And I'm totally fine not focusing on it because I know I can at any time. Like, it's just not this big thing on a pedestal that we're constantly striving for. Once we understand it, that is such a game changer. But with my own personal nutrition and training this year, like I said, I do have a fair few performance goals that I want to work towards, and I'm going to speak about those in a second. But one of the very first things that I've committed to doing this year is eating over 2,000 calories every single day for the whole year, which might sound awesome to some people. It might sound super scary to some people. I feel like a lot of people have an attachment to a certain calorie intake, like I can't eat that much, or I'd love to eat that much, whatever it might be. But for me personally, just to put into a little bit of context, an effective fat loss phase or an effective fat loss intake for me is around the 1,600 calorie mark. And then when I work towards a muscle gaining or a weight gaining phase, usually I do that around the 2,600 calorie mark. So making that decision to eat over 2,000 calories every day is really just making a commitment to not going into a fat loss phase for the whole year. And there's a few reasons that I want to do this. It's the overall health benefits to spending time out of a deficit. We don't want to spend prolonged time in a deficit. I've definitely spoken about this. I'm not going to harp on about that, but there are so many factors that take a hit when we're in a calorie deficit. So things like obviously strength, performance, training, and that's one of the big factors for me this year. But then other things like stress, sleep, libido, mood, hormone health, hunger, cravings, all of these things take a hit when we're in a deficit. So if we're doing that all the time, it honestly just becomes quite a shitty way to live. If you feel like you're constantly on a restrictive diet, constantly on low calories, physically you're feeling the effects of that, mentally and emotionally you're feeling the effects of that, it just starts to add up to be quite a shit time. So I just want to have a full year without that. Again, to put into context, normally I would spend anywhere from about 12 to 20 weeks a year doing that. So if I've spent 6 or 7 months of the year pushing muscle gain, I'll usually spend maybe 3 to 4 months pushing a fat loss phase on that lower intake, and then I'll try and get out of that as soon as I can for those reasons that we just spoke about. So making that commitment to eat over 2,000 calories is really just making sure that my body is well fueled every single day for the whole year, really. And obviously there's those physical health things that I just spoke about, but it also provides such a good quality of life. If we think about going onto a low calorie diet or a restrictive diet, whether we're doing it in a really positive way or whether it's a negative experience, whatever it might be, it is still quite a limitation and a restriction on your life. Like, you've got to be mindful of eating out. You might not be able to always eat the same things your partner eats. You might have to say no to some things, whatever it might be. Like, there will be times where that has an effect on your everyday life. And that's just something that I want to be really mindful of as well. Obviously, I have a wicked relationship with my partner, Shaq, and he's super into health and fitness and everything as well, but he is also literally double my size, so he can eat a lot more than me, and it is hard when I'm on super low calories and he's not, and obviously we try and juggle that and we make it work, but it's just something where I'm like, I would love to spend a whole year with like us eating more similar, eating more meals together, being able to go out and eat more. It just, without having that focus on fat loss and the scale and constant progress with those things, we can have that more flexibility with eating meals out, with enjoying different meals with our partner and things like that. So that's something that I just really want to prioritize and focus on this year. Shaq and I have some really cool plans this year, and I will speak about them soon, but this will tie in so well with that. The other piece to this too, and it's kind of on the flip side, but it's actually really cool, and I think that it's something that we don't speak about enough in the nutrition industry, is while it's awesome for me to be able to eat over 2,000 calories and have that flexibility and have that more freedom and everything, I'm going to prioritize being super consistent with that, because when we think about it, if I let that go too far and got too flexible and went out for too many meals and was too loose with everything and started to move in a direction that I didn't want to go with my body comp or the way I'm feeling or the way that I'm training, if I'm making the commitment to not go back to a fat loss phase, there has to be a bit of a threshold there. Like, if I think too often people get too flexible in these relaxed phases and they get too relaxed because they know that the next diet is coming. It's like, yes, I can go out for dinner and I can say yes to this and I can do this, and I'm probably eating too much and I'm probably going to eat too much the next day, and I'm going to let this keep going because I know my next fat loss phase is coming. And I think that can create a bit of a negative cycle where we don't actually learn how to maintain our health and our weight and our body composition, because we do a successful fat loss phase, we get the result that we want. A lot of people will claim they're going to maintenance, and they'll start eating a bit more, and yes, I can go out for dinner and it's awesome and things are a little bit more relaxed, and they let that go too far because they've had that successful fat loss phase and they think, well, I'll just do that again. And then when we step back and look at that over a few years, it's this constant cycle of getting the result that we want, going backwards to a point where we don't want to be, and then going again, and then going again. And I think it's so important to really be able to maintain our health and our weight and our body composition for the long term. Obviously, we're always going to have things like Christmas, birthday, holidays, whatever, where we might put on a kilo or two, or we might go backwards, or little things might happen. But there's a difference between that versus really getting stuck in that loop of dieting, undoing the diet, dieting, undoing the diet. So for me, I was speaking to Shaq about this before I came in here today, and was just saying it's actually a whole nother piece to this where you can't let it go too far. Like, I'm not going to go too far in the fat loss direction and go under 2,000 calories, but I can't let it go too far into having meals out and then going out again and having everything pile up and then getting to a point that I don't want to get to, because I'm making the commitment to then not turn around and do a fat loss phase because I'm feeling uncomfortable. So I hope all of that makes sense, but it's really about finding that sweet spot and actually staying there long term, not seeing it as a phase, not seeing it as like, oh, just do this and then I'll go into another phase later on. Like, if we think about, we are going to be eating for the rest of our life. And I think a lot of people forget about that when they sign up for, shitty diets, or they get into those 8-week things where they're like, oh, just do this for this time. And it's like, then what do we do after it? So that is something I really want to do, is look at my year as a whole and get really awesome overall consistency in place for the year, where I'm eating enough to fuel my health, fuel my training, have a super flexible, relaxed lifestyle, but not so far that I then feel like I have to run back to a diet. So I feel like one of the first things that comes up when I speak about this is people instantly ask me how much I weigh and how tall I am. I feel like everybody always wants to know the stats behind this. So I actually have not weighed myself in about 2 months. I've actually been sort of setting up this little performance project and these habits and this training program and everything throughout November and December, getting ready to really go for it in the new year. So I haven't weighed myself too much over that time. To put into context, when I push a really clear gaining phase, I will usually end that phase around the 68 kilo mark. And then when I push a really clear fat loss phase, I will usually end that around the 56 to 57 mark. So that's like a 12 kilo window when we think about it. And that in itself is coming back to what I was just speaking about, something that I want to avoid this year. And anytime I've done it in the past, it's been very intentional. But this year, I don't want to have such a big buffer of a high weight and a low weight. I really want to hold quite steady. But in saying that, I'm not really using my weight to monitor this. So last time I took my weight was around Christmas. Now it's like early Jan, and it was around the 58 kilo mark. And I am 168 centimeters tall, I think. So there's just the stats that people always want. But I think a really cool thing to speak about while we're on this topic, and I've spoken about this a little bit on Insta as well, is when I end a fat loss phase, usually I will do a fat loss phase to do something very intentional, like a shoot for my business or something like that. Like there's a really strong purpose behind it. And like I said, usually that will end around that 56 or 57 kilo mark. I personally don't love the look of my body at that weight as my everyday weight. And this is no discrimination to people that weigh that much. This is no discrimination to myself when I weigh that much. Obviously, like I said, it's very intentional. It looks great when you do photo shoots and all of those things. But personally, when I walk around in my everyday life, I feel my best around like the 59 to 61 kilo mark. So when we think about that, that's about 5 kilos heavier than my sort of peak low weight. And I think that's a really awesome point to acknowledge as well, is people get so caught up in just thinking like lighter is better, leaner is better. Like if I can see the scale go down, and we see this especially with numbers like what I just said, everybody wants to get under 60 kilos. If someone is 61 kilos, I could guarantee they want to get under 60. I see this all the time. If someone's 70 kilos or if they're 71, they want to get into the 60s. People really fixate on that number. But I think it's so important to step back and actually ask, like, where do I look and feel my best? For me personally, like I said, it is around that 60 to 61 mark. So fixating on simply dropping under that for the sake of seeing a 5 on the scale, it just doesn't fucking make sense. Like there's no point. And like I said, I've done that. And when I get there, I actually feel quite scrawny, quite skinny. And I sort of can't wait to like bulk up a little bit and sit at that little bit of a heavier weight. So I think that's so important for people to really think about. We see this all the time, and it's probably a whole nother topic in itself, but where people are really attached to a certain number. And I think it's important to just step back and ask, like, what is my actual goal? Like, usually we want to look and feel a certain way as opposed to just weigh a certain number for the sake of weighing that number. So I advise everybody to have a little think about that. When we look at that, so me gaining sort of like 3 to 4 kilos, it's so important to ask, like people would instantly see that and be like, I don't want to gain weight. You know, it's just this thing in people's mind of like, I don't want to gain weight. I don't want to see the scale go up. I think it's so important to ask, what else am I gaining? If we think about all those things I just spoke about with our physical health that take a hit when we're pushing a fat loss phase, but then also our lifestyle and our mental and our emotional health of being able to go out for meals and eat meals with our partner and be more flexible and have that overall better quality of life. If we come back to that question of what else am I gaining? Yes, maybe we did just gain 2 or 3 kilos on the scale, but maybe we gained so much other awesome shit as well. So again, just something else for people to think about, and definitely something that I've thought about and I'm focusing on this year with this performance project is, yeah, I'm probably going to hold an extra 3 or 4 kilos, but what I'm gaining with that is all of those things I've already mentioned. And like I just mentioned, what I consider to actually be a better body composition. Like I feel a lot better in myself. I feel a bit curvier, just feel a little bit more athletic and like a bit more of a female when I have that little bit more body fat and a healthy body as opposed to just like a super shredded light body. Like I said, I have a few performance goals that I want to focus on this year as opposed to body composition goals. These are more like gym-based goals, like weights that I want to hit in the gym, certain lifts that I want to hit. I'm not going to rattle them all off here because it will just be a bunch of numbers, but I will definitely be speaking to these on Insta over the coming weeks and over the coming months. This is not something where I'm just like, oh, this is a phase and then I'll go back to dieting or then I'll go back to this. I'm really looking at my year as a whole and just saying like, these are the things that I want to work on. There's no real dates. There's no real deadlines in place for these. It's just like, these are the things I want to work towards. And then really looking at everything else in my life, like nutrition, recovery, training, all of my little lifestyle habits, and really making sure that they're aligned with these goals that I have. But I was speaking to Shaq about this before I came in here today, and just saying, like, for example, for me to hit, like, one of my goals is to hit a 60 kilo front squat for 6 reps. So that's pretty much like a body weight front squat for 6 reps. I cannot do that right now. I think I could probably do around 40 kilos for 6 reps. So obviously there's work to do there. And that's kind of the point. This is where, like, when these goals are important to you and you've got a clear goal in mind, you just start to sort of reverse engineer it and think, well, if I want to hit that lift, I need to have the right structured training program in place to work towards it. Like, if the goal is 60 kilo for 6 reps, and right now I can only do 40 kilo for 6 reps, what has to happen in each training session? What has to happen each week to get to that point? Really sort of looking at point A and point B and working out how we get there. And if I'm going to go into the gym and work towards that, then you start to think, okay, cool, if I'm going to go into the gym and push myself for a PB, I've got to have a good meal in my system to do that. Like, there are certain things that are going to make me feel good and train well, as opposed to certain things that are not going to make me feel as good or train as well. So it just starts to be like, well, it makes sense to eat this good meal. If I'm going to push all these heavy lifts, like I'm sitting here looking at this list of my performance goals, and they are all heavy lifts. I also want to get a 5K run, but all of those things are personal best for me. They will be personal best when I hit them. I haven't done them before and I couldn't do them now. So if we think about that, if I'm going to go into the gym 4 times a week and work towards these things and eventually hit them, I'm asking my body to do something that it cannot do right now. It wouldn't make sense to be on low calories right now. It wouldn't make sense to be in an energy deficit. We know a calorie deficit is an energy deficit. It wouldn't make sense to say, I'm going to intentionally make my body deficient in energy and then ask it to do something it's never done before. Like, it actually doesn't make sense. So this is where everything starts to tie in together, and you think, okay, well, if I want to hit these things, what does training have to look like? If I want to hit these things, what does nutrition have to look like? And everything starts to piece together in a way that, like I said, it just makes sense, but it's also driven from a really clear goal. Like, if we sit and look at the goal of 60 kilo front squat for 6 reps, it's not just like I'm eating well for the sake of eating well. It's like I'm eating this meal to intentionally make sure there's fuel in my system to go and hit this training session that has been structured to work towards this goal that I have. It all just makes sense. I feel like too often people get caught up in just like, well, I should eat well for the sake of eating well, because it's the right thing to do, because it's the good thing to do. If there's no clear goal and purpose in mind that you're actually invested and attached to, it's only going to last for so long. Like, we just do these things because we think it's the right thing to do, or I'm being good, or I should do this. But there's no real personal drive there for you. So as time goes on, we just kind of fall off. And we've probably all done this with some sort of goal in our life, because we're actually not that invested in the end and the outcome. Like, we're not super clear as to why we would wake up every day and do those things in the first place. So like I said, I do have a list of certain lifts that I want to hit, and they are all things that I have worked towards over the years. Some of them I've hit before, some of them I haven't done for a long time. It's quite a mix, but I have had a fair few injuries over the years, just things like hamstrings, hips, glutes. We've all had those sort of things over the years from training. They're in quite a good position, and I've worked very hard on those physical injuries themselves, but also on my mindset around injuries and just overcoming things like that. And I would honestly say right now, I genuinely feel like I'm probably in the best physical and mental health that I've ever been in for my whole life. And it just makes so much sense to me to really work towards these goals. I feel like I said before, these are things that I can't do right now, but I genuinely know I can. And I know that I can with the right plan and the right work ethic in place. And that actually makes me super excited. Working towards body composition goals is actually quite easy for me. And it's still hard in the sense that you have to get up every day and really be quite strict and tick all the boxes. But I just do that very well. It comes very easy. I get into a routine. Nothing really gets in the way. It's just been something that I've always been able to do really well. And even in saying that, if I wanted to shoot again in 4 weeks, if I wanted to diet down for the next 4 weeks and do a photo shoot, I feel like I could do that very easily. I wouldn't bat an eyelid to do that. Whereas working towards some of these strength goals, like I said, I genuinely believe I can do them, but I also know that it's going to take a lot of work. And that's actually making me so excited, because it's not just like, oh, I'll just do this thing for 4 weeks and then I'll tick it off and, get the ego hit and get on with my day. It's actually something that I have to make quite a long-term commitment to. And it's something, like I said, that I have to then reverse engineer and look at the rest of my life and make sure that all of my other habits are aligned with those goals. It's actually really cool to be like, I'm going to pick these goals that are quite out of reach for me right now and actually commit to the long game of working towards them, which is actually making me so excited. And it also just makes me feel like excited in the sense of like, we're not just getting up every day and looking at the scale. We're not just getting those little boosts of fat loss here and there. Like when we do a successful fat loss phase, it's quite quick, it's quite effective. We can really see that progress. Whereas, like I said, this is such a bigger process. Like I'm really going to have to settle in and do the work without that constant reassurance and gratification, which I just think is actually really cool. So there is one goal in there that I mentioned I would come back to, and that is running 5Ks, which for some people, they might hear this and just be like, yeah, cool, I can run 40Ks, like that's nothing. But this is actually such a big and meaningful goal to me. If anyone knew me or has known me like personally way before my Eat Like Ruby days and everything, I was a runner my whole childhood, my whole like teenage years, coming into an adult. I was always a runner. I absolutely loved it. If you have, like I said, known me personally, or maybe you've been following me for a long time, you will know that that was the one thing that love that I shared with my dad. And some of you guys might know that he then actually died running. So if you didn't know that, sorry for the dropping bombs. But it is obviously then something that has been huge for me over the last few years. So just to give like a little bit of a backstory, I won't go into the whole story, but he did literally just go for a run and die of sudden cardiac arrest just over 6 years ago. So this was at the end of 2016. I was however old I was then, I think 24, maybe 25. He was 56, like super fit, super healthy. He's literally the reason that I got into training in the first place. Like I said, like running was the one thing that we both loved. And then that's just the way that worked out. So I literally have not run since that day. So obviously, like I said, this is a huge thing for me. It's a huge physical goal, mental goal, emotional goal. It's obviously been such a journey over the last 6 years to go through just like that whole grieving process and everything that came with him passing away. And I, like I said, have had a lot of injuries over those years. And it's been very much like physical injuries and physical blocks, but also a lot of mental and emotional blocks as well. I genuinely believe like a lot of my injuries just came from being in that state, being in that emotional state, and then kind of manifested through that. Obviously, they were there and I was injured in some ways, but I feel like the mental and emotional state that I was in made a lot of those things worse. And this is going back probably 4 or 5 years now, like when he first passed away. It's been something where I've obviously done a lot of physical work to get through those and done a lot of mindset work to get to such a good place with this. I feel like if someone had said to me like 2 or 3 years ago that I could go for a run, I would have genuinely not believed that. Like I would have been like, no, my injuries are too bad. I physically could not go for a run. And I would have genuinely believed that. Like I had convinced myself that that was something that I would never do again. And I feel like there's so much to that. Like obviously there was a fear thing, there was a resentment thing, there was so much there, but it was like a genuine belief. Whereas I physically know right now I could not run. If somebody said, let's run 5Ks right now, I know that my body is not conditioned to do that because like I said, I have not done it for 6 years. But with all of the mindset work and everything that I've done, I genuinely believe I will be able to do this again. And it's probably the first time in my life, or the first time in 6 years, I should say, that I have been able to say that and believe it. So that is obviously really exciting. And there's obviously a lot to this. And I'm going to speak a lot more about this over the next few weeks and months and everything. My goal is to run the 5K on Father's Day because I just think that would be so cool, which is obviously the beginning of September. So I'm literally giving myself like 9 months to work towards this. And this is not going to be easy for me. Like my body is not conditioned for this. It's not something that I can just do over the next couple of weeks and then tick off and move on. This is something where I've had to look and say, okay, cool. If I don't think I could run 5K right now, why is that? Like, what are the physical things that would stop my body from running 5Ks right now? And then really reverse engineer that back in my programming and start working on those things. And it's such a process when we program. Like I've spoken about this in recent episodes, but like we said before, if we have point B down or point A over here and point B down here, it's such a process to get to point B. It's not just like, oh, I want to run 5K, so I will go and run 5K today and then just keep doing that until I get better at it. Like I said, I'm looking at that and asking, why couldn't I do it? And then really programming based around those things and looking at the progression of those things. There's a lot of injuries that I'm looking at and individual body parts. For example, I've had an adductor injury and I said to Shaq, like my adductor could not handle the 5K. Absolutely. So I know right now strengthening my adductor is one thing that has to be in my program a few times a week, every week. And then we will progress through that adductor strengthening until it gets to the point where I feel like it could. So that's just one example. So it's breaking down all of those individual body parts and working on them. But then I said to him as well, really the first goal is to run 1K. Like I've got to get to a point where I run the 1K and then I see like what was hard about that, what was easy, what pulled up sore, what do I feel like was the physical thing there that would stop me from running 2K, and then take that back to the program, work on all of those things, work towards the 2K, and then go through that process again right up until September, where I will aim to run the 5K. And I just think that this whole process is really cool when you think about, like I said before, it's not a short-term thing. It's not just something that I'm going to easily do overnight. I really have to work it backwards and do the work now. And it's even, the last little thing I'm going to speak to is it's even like a bit of an ego piece. And I see this all the time with training. For example, I would love to like literally just put my shoes on right now and give it a go. Be like, let's just see how far I get. And I feel like people want to do that all the time with training. But if I did that, I'm literally going to leave this studio today and go and train legs. And that leg session has been designed to start working on all the little things that I think are too weak to run that 5K. So if I was to let my ego get in the way right now and be like, fuck it, I'm just going to put my shoes on and give it a go, I know for a fact I would pull up sore in a lot of places and I probably wouldn't train for like a week. So then I wouldn't go and work on those things that need to be worked on to get to that end goal. And if we think about that, I would just lose a week in this process. And then if I let myself keep doing that, being like, fuck it, I'm just going to push it and see how I go, then like I said, we pull up sore, we have to rest, we miss training, and the whole process is ruined. I know for a fact I'm not at that point. So you've got to push that ego aside and be like, I can't do this right now. What do I have to do and what would make sense for me to do today to work towards it. And that even comes back to everything I spoke about before with making sure nutrition and recovery and everything is in place. Obviously, based on what I've just spoken about, this 5K goal is so important to me. If I look at all those factors in my lifestyle, it's just such a no-brainer that I would make sure they are all on point to get to this end goal in September. And even things like, I feel like I've gone so off topic, but I'm just going to keep going. Even things like, at night, we see a lot of people be like, I want to get off my phone at night so I can sleep better. For me, I've been spending my nights literally stretching my feet and stretching my ankles while I watch TV before I go to bed. And I know that I can get a lot of pain in the arch of my right foot. That's a whole nother topic. But looking at my lifestyle, like I said, and saying, okay, cool, I could sit there at night and play on my phone and then possibly have a bit of a shitter sleep, get up, training wouldn't be as good, progress towards the 5K wouldn't be as good. It's such a domino effect in my life. And when that goal is so important and we reverse engineer it, it just wouldn't make sense to do that, as opposed to I could spend my night putting the phone away, stretching my feet, stretching my hips, stretching my back, then getting a better sleep because I've done all those things. The better sleep is going to lead to a better training session. The better training session and the time I've spent working on my feet and my hips is all going to work towards that 5K. So piecing all of that together, it comes back to what I said before of when we're super clear on the goal and the reason for the goal, we're not just doing shit for the sake of doing it. We're not just eating well for the sake of eating well. We're not just going to bed early for the sake of going to bed early. It's this makes so much sense for me to prioritize these things for my goal. So that was my little tangent. The one other little thing I was speaking to before about putting the ego aside and having to work towards it, as opposed to just giving it a go all the time and then, that backfiring. I see this so often with training, and a really good example is when people want to work towards chin-ups. I have girls all the time that are I want to work towards chin-ups. And when we think about the fact, if we can't do a chin-up and we want to do one, we need to look at the chin-up and say, okay, cool, I need to be able to pull myself up. I need to be able to hold myself up. I need to be able to lower myself down. There's so many parts to it. And when the goal is to get a chin-up, we want to reverse engineer from that and break down that movement and train every part of that movement in our training program. And then eventually we can get the chin-up. Too often I see people I want to get good at chin-ups, so I'll just go to the gym and do chin-ups. What can happen there? And it usually comes from that ego place. I'm just gonna smash them out and see how many I get. And what we tend to do there is naturally have stronger parts. We might have a stronger body part or a stronger part in the lift. If we're not breaking down that lift and working on each individual part and we're just smashing out the reps, the stronger parts get stronger and the weaker parts get weaker. If you're really strong in the biceps but really weak in the back, and you're constantly just repping out chin-ups and you're not training your back to get better at them, your biceps are just going to keep kicking in more and more and more. And your chin-ups that should predominantly come from the back are going to come more and more and more from the biceps. So we're not actually going to get better at the chin-up because we're not breaking it down and working on all those things and then putting it together to actually nail the movement. We're just going in, giving it a go. The bits that do it okay are going to kick in and take over, and the bits that are weak are going to tap out really quickly, and then we get stuck in this shitty cycle. And it would be the same thing, like I said, if I was to just try and go for a run, give it a bit of a go, pull up sore, give it a go the next week, and never actually step back and work on the things that are making me pull up sore, the things that are making me not be able to do it in the first place. So those are my personal goals for the year. Like I said, I obviously am speaking to these a bit on Insta. I'm speaking to these a bit on YouTube, all over the place. So definitely make sure you are following all those things if you want to follow along with the progress on these. But I will definitely keep everybody updated on the progress via Insta and YouTube and the podcast. Like I said, it's something that I'm looking at as the year as a whole. It's not just a phase for a couple of months or something that I'm going to tick off and then move on to the next thing. This is obviously a big goal to work towards for September, like I said, and it's really just about making sure that everything I do between now and then makes sense for that goal and is slowly progressing more and more towards that goal. So when that day comes around, I'm actually physically ready and conditioned to run it. So I hope this was interesting. Like I said, make sure you are definitely following me on Insta, which is eat_like_Ruby, because I will share heaps of updates and obviously just like my daily nutrition and training on there. And make sure you are following on YouTube, Eat Like Ruby as well. And that is all for today.